I don't know. Admit. Okay, starting over. Welcome to the 5th Collaborative Educational Meeting of the combined Colorado League of Women Voters News Access and Literacy Task Force and the Colorado Climate Emergency Task Force. My name is Sandy Schuster. I'm a member of Jefferson County League and have been convening these weekly meetings of the Climate Emergency Task Force of the League of Women Voters of Colorado since 2018. Both of these task forces have members statewide whom we encourage to share information they learn at these meetings with their local communities and local league members to educate everyone about two of the most critical issues of our time, communication and the environment. We also invite you to become members of one or both of these task forces to stay informed on the latest information. The repeal of the endangerment finding of 2009 is an assault on the hope to rid our planet of greenhouse gases that are warming the planet more quickly than predicted. What information are you getting from and about the EPA? We hope to help you with that today. Please stay on mute during the presentation and put questions in the chat or say them until the end. Our next joint meeting of the task forces will be on April 13th at 4 p.m. It's about good trouble, but more about that later in the program today. I'll now turn this over to Linda Hutchison, who is the chair of the News Access and Literacy Task Force of the League of Women Voters of Colorado.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sandy. I'm Linda Hutchinson. I'm the chair of the News Access and Literacy Task Force. We support credible journalism as being essential to democracy. We believe that the control of news content should remain with the newsroom and not an outside force, if you will. We believe that media literacy is important, and that's why we're here tonight to discuss how mis and disinformation have impacted our shared reality, I guess, as far as science goes. And I did want to make an announcement. The Jefferson County League, they've gone to a lot of effort to put together a series of webinars on how is media ruining democracy. It's close to that.
That's what it is.
And I put a link in the chat for you to check out their website, because if you live in the area, they will be running these they're not webinars, they're a series of meetings on mis and disinformation, and hopefully we can use what they learn from their series of meetings to create a toolkit that other local leagues can use in the future. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So we're happy to have Kate with us. Dr. Gilbert is going to do her own introductions because she knows herself better than just about anybody. We're so happy to have her as a member of the Larimer County League, and we're very interested in the alarming topic that she's bringing to us. So, Kate, thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody see that? Is that working?
That works.
Okay. So as Jane said, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters from Larimer County, and I'm also a scientist. And we'll be talking today about what's happening at the EPA and how the deregulation is making it clear that today's EPA is prioritizing polluters over the public. So just a very brief bio. I've worked as a research scientist at many different centers Memorial Sloan Kettering, the National Institute for Medical Research in London, Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, and the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. And now I run a consulting business. So a lot of my research was focused on the effects of environmental pollutants on human health. And I have dealt quite a bit with the EPA, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the basics for the EPA, it was an independent agency started in 1970, which means it's not under the auspices of HHS, which is good. And it was initiated by concerns that people were finally becoming aware of that the human activity was having a negative effect on the environment. And one of the big players in that was actually Rachel Carson, whose book in the 60s alerted people as to the effects of DDT on birds and other parts of the environment. So the EPA was started in 1970, and then as it grew, new acts and amendments gave it more regulatory authority. And we're going to talk about today 3 of the main acts associated with the EPA: the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Toxic Substances and Control Act. And associated with the TSCA, it was the Frank-Lautenberg Chemical Safety for 21st Century Act. It was an amendment to the Toxic Substance and Control Act. And as part of that amendment, the EPA was told to start prioritizing different toxic chemicals that were in the business realm. And they had to make a priority list of those chemicals, and they had to write assessments of all of those chemicals, and they had to hire an outside committee, scientific advisory committee on chemicals, for evaluating how the EPA looked at those toxic, the priority chemicals. And I was invited to be one of the inaugural members on that SAC committee. So I worked with the EPA for 3 years while we were evaluating those chemicals. I've also worked with the EPA at evaluating some of their other regulatory materials. I've reviewed grants for them, and I've received grants for them. So I do have a reasonable connection with the EPA. So let's start with the Clean Air Act. Why was it enacted? I think everybody knows. It was enacted in 73, and it's been amended many times, but it remains probably the most influential environmental law of modern times. So smog became an issue with this country back in the 40s, caused by coal-burning industries and vehicle emissions. And you can see some examples here. And this one was especially famous one. It happened over Thanksgiving weekend in 1966 in New York City, and it ended up causing the deaths of 158 people and many, many trips to the emergency room. So, as we know, smog consists of ground level ozone, lots of different gases, and particulate matter, and we'll talk about that particulate matter in a minute. So what does it do, the Clean Air Act? Well, it established certain standards that governed how much of these different pollutants could be in the outdoor air. And it finally gave the EPA the power to actually regulate both vehicular and industrial output so that they could maintain those basic standards. It reduced air pollution, improved air quality, and is credited with saving trillions of dollars and many thousands of lives each year. And here's just a picture of the difference between 1968 and 2005 in Mendocino, California. And anybody that remembers what LA looked like back in the 60s and 70s knows that smog was a huge issue there as well as many other places. So what is the Trump EPA doing to attack the Clean Air Act? One of the things it's doing is by decreasing the standards for particulate matter. So as it turns out, particulate matter is small particles suspended in the air and happens to be actually the most dangerous component of smog. And these are very tiny particles that can go right through the lungs, into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and basically get all through the body. And worldwide exposure to these fine particulates, they call them PM 2.5s, is thought to have contributed to 7.8 million deaths in 2021. That's worldwide. And we'll talk some more about what they cause, but it includes heart, stroke, cancers, all sorts of, there's many different endpoints for that exposure. So the particulate matter limits had been 9 micrograms per cubic meters. That is what the Biden administration worked to achieve. Now the Trump administration is proposing to increase that from 9 to 12 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, this may not seem like that much, but it actually has a huge impact. And when they were deciding to change this limit, they did not consider the impact on human health or healthcare costs. And if they succeed in this, it's still being debated. It's expected to cause, as you can see, many more premature deaths, asthma attacks, hospital visits, and 46 billion extra in healthcare costs by 2023. So why is the EPA no longer considering healthcare costs in its decision making? That was actually a huge event that happened when the EPA decided they were no longer going to consider healthcare costs. So according to Trump's EPA, the methods for estimating the impact of particulate matter on human healthcare costs, which has been done in the past, are not good enough. So they're just not going to use those anymore. And I love this part. This agency said in a statement in January of this year, absolutely remains committed to our core mission of protecting human health and the environment, but will not be monetizing the impacts at this time on human health. However, they will continue to estimate costs to businesses. So they will monetize the effects on businesses, but they're not going to monetize the effects on human health costs. And here's just some of the effects that these small particulates have been shown to cause human health. Obviously, upper respiratory disease, lower respiratory diseases, cardiovascular, they've been linked to increased risk of heart attacks and strokes, lots of immune effects. It causes immune suppression, which means that you are more susceptible to infection. And it also causes systemic inflammation, which is also bad. It causes neurological effects. Now there are papers saying that it may be linked to an increase in neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's. So this stuff is bad news, and it's certainly a bad thing if they're going to change the limits on these. Second thing they're doing for the Clean Air Act is by decreasing the standards for coal plants. So in 2023, coal plants only produced about 16% of U.S. electricity. Now that may actually be increasing since the Trump administration is forcing a lot of the coal plants to stay open. Anyway, they are among the largest sources of hazardous air pollution. Release all kinds of nasty stuff into the air. So once again, in the Biden administration, the existing mercury and air toxic standard, which is what we're concerned about when it comes to coal plant emissions, were updated to be more protective. And you can see they were expected to reduce mercury pollution by 70% and a huge savings in healthcare costs. The Trump EPA is rolling back the 2024 ruling because they want to alleviate the cost for utilities that run older coal plants at a time when demand for power is been driven by AI expansion. So they are still thinking that coal power plants are what they are going to need to at least to an extent to run this huge influx of AI data centers. And of course, we have the quote from Lee Zeldin that President Trump has been a champion of clean, beautiful coal, which we all know is a misnomer. Okay. So let's see yeah. The third thing, which we've just heard about, that the EPA is doing to attack the Clean Air Act is by eliminating the ability to regulate greenhouse gases. So most of the time we talk about air pollution, we're talking about, as we said, particulate matter, ozone. And then greenhouse gases are a separate category. They include nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, CO2, and they have long-term effects on human health, as well as, of course, affecting the atmosphere. And they're caused, like many of the air pollutions, by burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and agriculture. So the EPA wanted the greenhouse gases to be added to the Clean Air Act. So in 2007, the ruling to do this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed that greenhouse gases qualify as pollutants under the Clean Air Act. But the court wanted assurances that these pollutants actually endanger human health. So the EPA produced a mountain of evidence, the 2009 endangerment finding, that convinced the court that these pollutants were indeed dangerous to humans. This gave the EPA the power to regulate the emission of these chemicals. So that's the important part. We always need the EPA to have the power to actually regulate these things. And that's what the endangerment finding did. And of course, as most of us know, in just last month, Trump rescinded the endangerment finding that allowed the EP to regulate greenhouse gases. And once again, Lee Zeldin came out with, under President Trump's leadership, the Trump EPA has finalized the single largest act of deregulation in the history of the United States of America, as if that was a good thing. So what are the consequences? Well, as you can see, there's going to be lots more pollution. There's going to be lots more money spent by consumers in terms of lost fuel economy, something that is obviously especially important right now. The U.S. is going to isolate itself from the rest of the world, who is focusing on electric vehicles. There's going to be long and lengthy legal challenges. And but the good thing is, of course, that there is going to be $1 trillion saved by the industry in terms of less compliance costs. So it's really good for the industry. It's really bad for the rest of us. Okay, so what about the Clean Water Act, which was originally called the Federal Water Pollution Control Act? It is the primary law in the U.S. governing water pollution. It was established in 1972 to restore and protect streams, rivers, oceans, and lakes connected to navigable waters, and that's important. It addresses surface, once again, navigable waters and not groundwater contamination. It established certain water quality criteria, once and again, standards in terms of what could be in the water. And it gave the EPA the power to regulate sources of pollution that were contaminating those navigable waters. And one of the most egregious acts, which actually initiated the the Clean Air Act, was the Cuyahoga River, which is infamous. In the 1960s, it was the source of a ton of environmental pollution from the industries around Cleveland. And the river was famous for the fact that the oil slick was so bad that it caught fire 14 times. The river caught fire. And then finally, for some reason, it received a lot of publicity in 1969. And that helped initiate the Clean Water Act. And now today, thanks to the Clean Water Act, the Cuyahoga River is, as you can see, very nice looking. So what is the Trump EPA doing in terms of the Clean Water Act? They are rescinding the protection for wetlands. So in the end of last year, the EPA redefined the Clean Water Act to exclude entities that don't have surface water for the entire year and therefore are not navigable for part of the year. So those are not going to be held accountable to the Clean Water Act. That means 80% of wetlands will lose protection by the EPA. It'll make it much easier for industries to contaminate those water sources. It has done other things to attack the Clean Water Act. It's under the auspices of preventing regulatory outreach. The EPA wants to limit the states and tribes' ability to use the Clean Water Act to block or delay certain development projects. So if you thought this project was going to be an impediment to the Clean Water Act, you no longer have the power at the state or the tribal level to do anything about it. They also froze, at the very first day, $10 billion in federal money for new water treatment plants and replacing lead pipes. And they're also, once again, because of the coal industry, they're rolling back industrial pollution limits for those coal-fired power plants. So it's much easier for them to contaminate the nearby water sources. Okay, and now we're going to talk about the Toxic Substance and Control Act. So this regulates chemicals not covered by other statutes. So what that means is all the chemicals that are being used in commerce. They're not necessarily water pollutants or air pollutants. They may be a source of pollution and toxicity for people who are working with it or for people who are using products that contain them. So when TSCA went into effect in 1976, they grandfathered in over 50,000 chemicals that were already on the market. That means that the vast majority, almost all of them, have not been tested for human health effects. So when the Lautenberg Amendment came into place, like I said, they established deadlines for assessments of regulatory chemicals, and they established the SAC. The idea being that the EPA now had to come up a list with priority chemicals, which had never been tested before specifically for human toxicity, but there was enough research, thanks to me and other scientists out there, to suggest that these chemicals were in fact harmful to humans. And so the job of the EPA was to decide whether to come up with that list and then decide whether those chemicals on the list were actually harming workers or consumers associated with those chemicals. So here's what this is 5 of the top 10 high priority chemicals that I worked on when I was on TSCA. And here's what the EPA is now doing to the recommendations that the EPA came up with regarding these chemicals. For example, dioxin. We concluded in agreement with the EPA that this chemical was causing unreasonable risk to humans and consumers, workers and consumers. And it should have been, those restrictions should have come into place much faster. But in 2026, the EPA is still saying we're working on a rule. That conclusion has basically, so it's been 7 years and they still haven't decided on how to protect workers and consumers from that chemical. Here's another one, NMP. It actually went all the way to the Federal Register banning its use. That means once they put a chemical into the Federal Register, it says what the regulations are going to be, and it sets deadlines for when these companies get rid of these chemicals. And that deadline was supposed to be 2025. And now the current EPA is extending that deadline to 2027. Carbon tetrachloride, another very nasty chemical. Once again, we agreed with the EPA that it causes unreasonable risk to workers. There was once again, it went into the Federal Register saying that this chemical should be banned or restricted effective the beginning of 2025, and EPA is now reconsidering the whole rule. You have to know that each one of these evaluations takes months of work, lots and lots of workers from the EPA working on it. We had 24 people in a SAC committee all looking at this. The reports are like 1,500 pages long, very detailed, very carefully considered. And now, because the EPA does not like the ruling that we made in the past, they're reconsidering it. Trichloroethylene, one of the chemicals I actually worked on, we decided that it was causing unreasonable risk to workers and consumers. The ban was supposed to go into effect in 1/16/2025. And I've received emails from the EPA every 3 months, basically postponing it. So right now it's postponed to May of this year. We'll see if it goes into effect then. Perchloroethylene, another one. We also said it should be banned. It went into the Federal Register saying it should be banned, and now the EPA is reconsidering. So all that work, and it was clear that these chemicals were causing risk to workers and consumers, and the EPA is now rescinding those things or at least slow walking them. Other examples, I'm sure we've heard about some of these. I've talked about this before about the effects on forever chemicals. The ethylene oxide is being slow walked. Formaldehyde also being partially rescinded. We'll talk about that in a minute. And of course, the whole thing about Roundup and glyphosates. So 2 of these chemicals are considered toxicants, and they are still walking back the regulations for these. So who is leading the deregulation? It's Lee Zeldin. Now, most EPA directors have backgrounds in science and have worked in some capacity for the EPA. And they emphasize the role of the EPA in protecting the environment and human health. Now, I have to say, this does vary from whether a Republican or Democrat is in the White House, the degree to which the EPA is protecting human health. Lee Zeldin he has no background in science. He's a political scientist. He has a BA in political science and a law degree, and he was a close friend of President Trump. He actually helped him in some of his trial work. And his agenda, as you can say here, is not necessarily to protect the environment, but to lower the cost of buying a car, heating a home, and running a business. Totally pro-business. Another example, we talked about PFAS, or very dangerous chemicals that we've heard a lot about now, and they have been designated as CERCLA hazardous substance. CERCLA means that if they are PFAS and you are releasing those as a company, if they're on the CERCLA list, you have to report that and keep track of it. And it's a major pain for a lot of industries, so they want to do whatever they can to stay off the CERCLA list. But the EPA said, no, you have to tell us how much you are emitting. Now, obviously, the polluters of PFAS pushed back with the help of a lawyer named Steve Cook. In 2025, Lee Zeldin gave Steve Cook a high-level job at the EPA. In that same year, he met with the major PFAS polluters, and the very next day, an internal committee on the EPA recommended that the 2024 ruling about PFAS being added to the CERCLA list be rescinded. So far, that ruling has not been rescinded, but it's still under review. Another example, in the Biden administration, the EPA evaluated formaldehyde and concluded that in terms of calculating cancer risk, there is no safe exposure level. And that's because for a lot of carcinogens, the EPA will say there is technically no safe exposure level if it caused genotoxicity. And then they have another non-cancer toxicity standard. So there's usually two different standards for the chemicals. One is cancer, and one is non-cancer. And they estimated the non-cancer at, as you can see, 0.0057 parts per million. In that case, the industry pushback was led by Lynn Deklava. She worked for many years at DuPont and was the senior director of the American Chemical Council. She is now at the EPA as the principal deputy assistant administrator in the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And not surprisingly, the EPA has recently reversed course and now says there is a safe exposure limit for both chemical and non-chemical toxicity based on what they call what causes skin irritation. This is clearly wrong and ridiculous. But that is what the EPA is now saying. So what can we do? One of the important things right now, I think, is that you will see development projects, including these new AI development projects, saying that they will adhere to current EPA standards. But in view of the fact that there's been so much deregulation in terms of the EPA standards, we can't say that keeping to EPA standards is going to protect us. We need to demand better. In the past, we could depend on the EPA to help us to be very protective, but it is totally pro-industry right now. And so we can't depend on them. As you may know, the Craig and Comanche coal burning power plants their lives have been extended They were supposed to be, some of them were supposed to be retired, but Trump has made sure that they're going to keep going, and they are the major sources of a lot of air pollution. Now, you can be glad you live in Colorado. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has stricter standards in terms of methane emissions, PFAS product bans, not in terms of what can be in the water, but in terms of product bans. And it does regulate additional air toxics besides the ones regulated by the EPA. But I will say that for example, the nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the major pollutants in air pollution, the standard for that is the same in Colorado as it is for the EPA. And perhaps most importantly, we need to get people in government who will insist that the EPA is led by people that use accurate scientific information as opposed to depending on in terms of industrial lobbyists to make their policies. And I think, let's see. Oh, no, that was just an extra slide. I think that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is that me to read the chat? You want me to read the chat?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Barbara has a comment that she lived in Southern California in the 60s and the smog smelled so bad that she avoided walking outdoors after the shocking discovery of how unpleasant the stench was, and worse, it was unhealthy. So, and Pat asks, how do these changes compare to restrictions in other parts of the developing world, and developed countries like Europe?
That's a good question. If you look at the WHO standards for some of these things, you will find that they are stricter. But here they bounce around, as I said, depending on who's in charge. So some years they may be more protective or as protective as the ones in Europe, and then right now they're not. So a lot of the chemicals that we're still mucking around with trying to decide whether they need to be banned from commerce, they're already banned in Europe. And they require a lot more upfront testing before they allow new chemicals on the market. Right now, it is not true here.
And then Jane would like to know, where do you find NMP? Is anyone left in the EPA to work on the reconsiderations?
I'm sorry, could you read that again?
Well, there's two questions here.
Oh, okay.
Where do you find NMP?
I should know that, but it's been 6 years since I reviewed those. I don't remember where that chemical, what kind of products that is used for. A lot of these are used, a lot of the ones we looked at first were volatile organic compounds that were used for degreasing. So it may be one of those. I'm afraid I don't remember anymore.
And is anyone left in the EPA to work on the reconsiderations?
The reconsiderations? You mean what?
Well, they were still considering some of the things that
Oh,
it was a delaying tactic, and I just wondered if there was anybody left that we could contact or that we could support in what they're doing, or
I think that the scientists are doing everything they can, and I have utmost respect for the people on the front lines who are fighting for us. It's the administration that is squashing all this, and I don't know that we can do anything about that. Because the scientists that do the research and write the reports don't have that much control over the regulatory portion of this whole thing.
Uh,
Alice's hand is up.
Yeah.
I have my hand up. Can I ask a question?
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
I noticed on the list of chemicals that have been reconsidered, uh, they were all, that was all listed in the EPA on 1/17/25, which means that was before Trump was inaugurated. So what was going on in the EPA that was happening before Trump even got in charge?
I think all those, let me go back and look at my slides.
They were all dated 1/17/25, and then they're reconsidered for later this year.
Yes, yes. So they were initially supposed to be banned at that time point. And now the EPA, so that was right before the Trump administration took power. And as soon as they came on, that's when all the regulations started. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess I misread that. I assumed that was when they were rescinded.
Oh, no, no. That's when they actually went into the Federal Register saying that they should
Okay.
be banned by this date.
Okay, all right.
And
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sandy Schuster.
We never met the Clean Air Act standards here in the Front Range. Are we going to be able to
Right.
meet them now that they're changing them?
That's a very good question. I mean, I know that the people here in the state are doing what they can, but if they're going to let diesels drive through the state with higher emission standards, and they're going to let the emission standards for the coal burning plants go
Yeah.
untouched, I don't know. I think it's going to make the job very much more difficult for the state. I don't know how they can get around the effects of the federal guidelines.
Because of other things that are going to make it worse.
Right, like, we've been talking about the data center in Weld County and whether or not they're going to be using diesel to power their data center. So there's going to be many things that are going to be worse. And I don't know how the state's going to be able to combat those. I'm sure they'll try.
And Sandy. Okay, you're muted, Sandy.
I looked up the MNP and it is used in magnetic compounds.
Magnetic. Okay.
And Monique, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wondered if you could speak about the unique circumstances here in the Front Range with the altitude, and I'm sure there are other factors I'm not aware of that make air pollution so damaging to people, to humans.
So that's a little out of my purview.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
I can tell you about what's happening at the EPA level, but I've read something about it, of course, and I know that Colorado has a special plan for northern Colorado as far as dealing with all the air pollution, but I don't know the actual conditions on the ground,
Right.
the
Okay.
topography. Yeah, sorry.
No, oh, no problem.
I think Maggie wants to talk.
Who?
Maggie?
Yes, many years ago, I was on the DRCOG Air Pollution Committee for a time. And at the time, we were worried about particulates in the air over Denver. And a lot of those particulates came from gravel roads and sources like that. But I wondered who is benefiting from the change in the particulate standard now?
It's going to be the industries. For example, if they want to keep coal plants operational, it'll be much easier for them to do that if they don't have to worry about the particulate emission. A lot of the cars, the standards will be lowered on that, so the car industry will be happy. They don't have to go to all the extra trouble. So it's mostly those kind of industries which are going to benefit.
Can I add something on that? Because that's been in the news lately, and the coal companies really don't want to have to do that because it's expensive for them to refigure these plants.
Right,
So they
right.
work.
Well, I know the coal company doesn't want to even keep their power plants going, some of them, but they're being forced to now. So I think the one in Craig, it was supposed to close down at the end of 2025, and now they extended it to at least the end of March of this year. So I don't know what's happening on that, if it's going to be extended beyond that or not. But you're right, a lot of the coal companies are not enthused about these changes. It's more of a federal issue.
And then Janet would like to know who we contact to push for closure of Craig and Comanche coal plants.
Ooh, that's a good question.
I did just read that the state of Colorado is suing
Okay,
because of that ruling. So
okay.
I'm, you know, we can look that up though.
Yeah, that probably yeah, I don't know that contacting the coal plants would do any good because I don't think they want to do this anyway.
It's the utilities.
Yes, oh yes, the utilities. And I don't know, honestly. I don't know how to advocate for that particular thing.
Well, even the utilities are finding that solar and wind are cheaper for them.
Sure.
And are they pushing, or is this just the administration that wants to thinks they're doing something useful and aren't?
I'm under the impression it's the administration that's pushing this. I don't think the utilities are pushing this.
I haven't heard that there were.
Yeah.
Anne has something to say.
Yeah, on the Craig plant, there's a bill going through right now. The sponsors are Representatives Wilford and Froelich. It's passed the House, it's in appropriations, and this is to put in some guardrails. It specifically mentions that plant because they got a nasty gram from the Department of Energy, and they're trying to delay that and put in some additional guardrails. Sandy's correct. The state, Phil Weiser, is suing to not have that plant closed down. The Craig plant is operated by Tri-State Generation and Transmission, and they do
Right.
they do not want to keep it open because it's needs repairs. It's going to cost them lots of money to make it operational again. They want to leave it down. The Comanche plant, I think, is Excel.
So what did you
But
say
the
they're trying to?
the bill covers one of the things it covers is all of the 6 coal plants that are scheduled to be retired, like in the next 5 to 10 years.
And they want it to go forward.
Well, if they make them keep the Craig plant open, then all of the others are going to be subject to the same kind of nasty gram from Department of Energy.
So what are they trying to do? Are they trying to close it or trying to keep it open?
Well, Tri-State wants to close it, so
Now,
they're
what about
they're
the
delaying.
bill?
They're sort of trying to play nice with them and get a delay on it. And our Attorney General is suing, so we'll see what happens.
But they're suing to put some guardrails, as you say, to
The bill is putting in guardrails.
Right.
The suit, I think, is just saying you can't do that to us, or
Okay.
I don't know what it is.
Well, it's not
That's-
only expensive to the plant, to the companies, it's expensive for their customers. Because who's going to pay for all that if they have
Yeah.
to spend
And-
millions of dollars to
and-
put that plant back in order?
And Tri-State is already developing the land for renewables. They're ready to go forward with renewables.
Well, and I just read an article yesterday that said that a lot of the AI data centers are fed up with trying to find enough energy. So they're moving more towards lots of diesel generators on their properties. So they don't have to worry about whether Excel has enough energy. And they've decided it's cheaper to do that than to build wind turbines or anything like that on the property.
Amy, do you want to talk about what you just put in the chat?
Yes, if anyone's interested, there is Dr. Velma Campbell to contact at Physicians for Social Responsibility. She runs a group because she's from Pueblo that is working on closure. And they've attended a lot of these meetings, and she's spearheaded a lot of work in working with the communities there. So you can contact her through the Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thank you.
Thank
That's a
you.
good source.
Pat,
I was just going to say, I've read several articles that I used to work for the utility business. They're going to have to redo a bunch of stuff. It's going to cost a lot of money, and they don't want to do it. The utilities do not want to keep those plants open. So you could write to your utility if you have Excel or a Tri-State and say, thank you. We don't want, please do fight this effort to make those plants stay open. It's not in your interest. It's not in our interest. You can do that. You can thank Phil Weiser for suing. I think that would be probably helpful, encourage him to keep going, keep trying. So I'm wondering, what was I wondering about? Now I can't remember my other thing I was wondering about. I'll leave it at
It'll
that.
come to you soon, I'm sure.
Sandy, Maggie, Marky, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There is a book out called Science Under Siege, written by Martin. Darn, I don't remember the name. Anyway, I do recommend it because in addition to discussing
We're
the
back?
problems, I'm sorry.
My bad.
Oh, in addition to discussing the problems with many of the things that science is running into now, he lists names of who the people are funding these putting the pressure on in Washington, and I think that's helpful to know. And I do recommend the book.
Science Under Siege.
Yep.
Good title.
It's by Michael
Yeah.
Mann. It's by Michael
Michael.
Mann and Peter Hotez.
Right.
I'll
I
put
put it in the chat.
Oh,
It's already in there.
she beat me to it.
Mhm.
Yeah, Linda did it.
Well, isn't that just enough to really piss you
Curl
off?
your toes.
Well, thank
Well
you,
said.
Kate. I know that even though we may not like what we hear, knowing the correct information does help us to make some better decisions about what to do, and to think that they can have a $10 billion freeze on clean water while asking for $200 billion for an illegal war just shoots it right on up there, I tell you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, thank you so much for
My pleasure.
waving the red flag. It's